The history of Unitarian Universalism is filled with examples of people who, in their time, were free thinkers, who bravely conducted their free and responsible search for truth and meaning in an environment under pressure from the church and government authorities, ready to put them on trial and burn them at the stake. Our history is also filled with stories of people who made a difference, who acted courageously to promote justice and make change. There's Michael Servetus, the 16th century Spanish physician and theologian, who was hunted down and executed because he questioned the doctrine of the Trinity. We can look back on Universalist Olympia Brown, the first woman minister whose ordination was officially recognized by a national denomination. In the first decades of the 20th century, Unitarian minister John Haynes Holmes was a co-founder of both the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and the American Civil Liberties Union. And the impulse to form the ACLU was around the need for legal advice for the young men who were being rounded up in what they called the Palmer Raids, which is where they were hunting down people who didn't register for the draft for World War I. John Haynes Holmes was a pacifist, and that was one of the legacies that he has given to us. Later, in the middle of the 20th century, Unitarians Waitzel and Martha Sharp rescued hundreds of adults and children from the Nazis. They are two of the only 5 citizens of the United States who have been formally named righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem. Adoption of the flaming chalice as a symbol of Unitarian Universalism occurred in connection with their work because they needed an image to put on their documents and identity cards. In 1965, James Reeb, a UU minister who answered Martin Luther King's call for white clergy to join the civil rights campaign, was brutally beaten to death in Selma, Alabama. Just a few days later, also connected with the activity in Selma, Viola Luzio, the Unitarian Universalist from Detroit, Michigan, was killed by the KKK with gunfire as she was transporting Black civil rights activists to the Montgomery, Alabama airport. You may have seen this scene in the movie Selma. However, our history of how we've grappled with issues of racial justice is mixed. Examples include what's known as the Black empowerment controversy that nearly tore apart the UUA during the years of 1969 and 70. Two groups of Unitarian Universalists, the more strident Black Action Council and the more centrist Black and White Action, competed for recognition and funding. Although it stood to receive $250,000 a year over 4 years from the UUA, compared to $50,000 for the Black and White Action Group, the Black Action Council held that funding both groups was contradictory. This conflict led to a walkout at the 1969 UUA General Assembly. It's known as the Black Empowerment Controversy. In 1993, on the 250th birthday of Thomas Jefferson, planners of the UUA's General Assembly in Charlotte, North Carolina, decided to host a ball to honor him, and they invited attendees to wear period costumes. During one of the plenary sessions, Hope Johnson, who was a friend of mine, recently died, a Black woman, read a statement on behalf of several Black delegates. They questioned what period costumes would be best for them to wear to the ball. Perhaps it should be rags and chains? Much more recently, in the spring of 2017, Christine Rivera, a Latinx religious educator, authored a blog post titled, "On Being a Good Fit for the UUA." She added, "No, I'm not a good fit, and that's what's wrong with the UUA." She revealed that she had been a finalist for a regional lead position. She pointed out that for the third time within as many years, a white minister and a white male minister had been hired to fill a leadership position in the UUA. Christina is held in high regard by colleagues who've worked with her. They viewed her as highly qualified for the regional lead position. claims of white supremacy were raised publicly by UU people of color. Now, this was a shock to many UU staff members and to the UUA Board of Trustees, in part because, like me at the time, their conception of white supremacy mainly focused on people in white robes and hoods who burned crosses on the lawns of Black families and who murdered people like James Reeb. The storm around the issue led to the resignation of Peter Morales, president of the UUA at the time, along with several members of the UUA staff. Members of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism stepped up to recommend a plan for a white supremacy teach-in during 2017, with the objective of helping Unitarian Universalists understand the nature and impact, not so much of white supremacy philosophy held by individuals and groups, but of white supremacy culture, which perpetuates the unintended and often unconscious assumptions and practices that tend to benefit white people and exclude people of color. Let me check my green light's on. Organizers of the teach-in explained that in the present, actual white supremacists are not required in order to uphold white supremacy culture. Overt intention to exclude isn't needed, and there's a difference between intent and impact. The majority of UU congregations around the country participated in the 2017 white supremacy teach-in. Personally, I believe the activists are owed a thanks for the constructive approach in which they educated all of us, rather than the alternative of simply walking out of the UUA. From this episode, ideas for an 8th UU principle evolved. Members of Black Lives UU and others came together to draft and propose an 8th UU principle. Their wording was this: we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. At the same time, a proposal was made to amend the UU first principle to read the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, rather than the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In the background was the growing awareness that Unitarian Universalism has been plagued by an excess of individualism. There was a need to change the I church into the we church. While some saw this as a threat to free thinkers and as the troubling seed of authoritarian dogma, other voices were saying that our 7 principles have it all backwards. Rather than starting with the individual and moving to the interdependent web of all existence, we needed to start with that interdependent web and with community and go from there to individualism. Leaders of the UUA wisely drew on the energy behind those ideas to create an Article 2 study commission to identify needed changes in the section of the bylaws that included our 7 principles and 6 sources. Part of the charge to the commission was a request to identify a common theological core, which we could agree on as our common associational point of covenant, what lies behind our 7 principles and 6 sources. The result of these efforts is an entirely new version of Article 2, focusing on values that are rooted in our common core of love. Article 2 is the part of our bylaws that delineates the 7 principles and the 6 sources. The revised Article 2 was proposed and read at the 2022 UUA General Assembly, first of a 3-part process that will eventually lead to its adoption. This year, delegates of the 2023 General Assembly, of which I was one, were able to introduce proposed amendments to the version read the prior year. Then the third and final step of the process will be at the upcoming 2024 General Assembly, when voting delegates must approve the version as amended by a 2/3 majority Approval is likely, as over 80% of the 2023 delegates voted for the version that will get the final vote next year. During the 2023 business sessions, many delegates rose to say that they had become Unitarian Universalists because of our current 7 principles. A few of those delegates were in tears. Some pleaded, "Don't take away our principles." In response, others rose to say, congregations that have the central 7 principles hanging on their walls should not take them down. We still have them. They're part of our heritage, but we must grow and change as the makeup of our congregations is growing and changing. We don't have time to read the entire draft of the new Article 2, but I do want to share with you the language about our common values as it was included in the final proposed version. And we have a graphic image that will display what those are. Our values are inseparable from one another, and these shared values are interdependence. This is the text of the amendment. We honor the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. With humility and reverence, we covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation, creating and nurturing sustainable relationships of care, repair, mutuality, and justice. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive, democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations and society at large. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. And finally, equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. I am very moved and pleased that we're moving in this direction. And I feel hopeful about that direction. I have participated in 7 UUA General Assemblies. And this year I watched the GA proceedings. As I watched them, I was moved to see much more diversity on the stage and on the platform. People of color, people of different genders and gender identities, all together on the stage at our General Assembly. I'm grateful that I was honored to participate in the 2023 General Assembly, and I'm available to respond to your comments and questions. And I thank you for this opportunity.